In Greensboro, North Carolina, where old brick mills still stood beside newer industrial parks, Ainsley Textiles had grown into one of the most powerful fabric companies in the region. Every month, trucks carried fine linen, upholstery cloth, specialty cotton, and expensive sewing materials across several states. Hundreds of families depended on the company, and for decades the Ainsley name had represented reliability. Yet behind the humming machines and polished executive offices, something was rotting from within. Arthur Ainsley, the aging founder, had begun noticing losses that could no longer be explained as ordinary mistakes. Premium fabric disappeared before reaching customers. Purchase orders showed quantities nobody remembered approving. Inventory codes were altered after midnight. Payments were made to suppliers that seemed to exist only on paper. Arthur suspected someone close to management. His son, Luke Ainsley, believed the problem was larger. Luke was only 27, but grief had made him seem older. 2 years earlier, his young wife had died unexpectedly in a highway accident. Afterward, the cheerful heir who once attended charity dinners and industry conventions disappeared from public life. Luke rejected interviews, avoided photographs, and rarely entered the factory through its main doors. He preferred watching from places where nobody watched him. One rainy evening, he sat across from his father in the darkened executive office. "If they know who is investigating," Luke said, "they will clean everything before we find it." Arthur studied his son. "And what are you proposing?" "That we become invisible." Luke had already chosen 2 men he trusted. Andrew Mercer, an internal auditor known only to senior leadership, would quietly enter accounting as a temporary clerk. Another investigator, Mason Reed, would work near purchasing and dispatch. Luke would take the least glamorous position of all: the warehouse. The following morning, wearing steel-toed boots, faded work pants, and a plain company shirt, Luke entered his own family's factory, carrying employee paperwork bearing a shortened version of his name. No one recognized him. The warehouse occupied the rear half of the industrial complex. Forklifts moved constantly between narrow lanes. Fabric rolls towered above workers like colorful walls. Heat collected under the metal roof, mixing with dust and the clean chemical scent of newly processed cloth. Luke spent his first hours lifting boxes and memorizing faces. Soon he noticed troubling details. Labels had been replaced on several premium rolls. Expensive material was recorded as cheaper stock. Certain pallets disappeared into loading areas before receiving final scans. Then, near a cutting station, he noticed someone entirely different. A tall young woman was folding fabric with unusual care. Her straight blonde hair fell nearly to her waist, though she kept pushing it behind one ear while checking measurements on an old clipboard. Everyone else seemed hurried. She seemed precise. When a bolt of fabric slipped from another worker's cart, she stopped what she was doing and helped him gather it without complaint. Luke watched longer than he intended. A warehouse employee named Earl noticed. "That's Rachel," Earl murmured. "Lives way outside town, gets here before most of us, and catches the last bus she can home." Luke looked away. Something about her quietness stayed with him. At lunch, he saw Rachel reviewing labels beside the loading records. He approached casually. "You always inspect things twice?" She looked surprised. "Sometimes 3 times. Why?" Rachel lowered her voice. "Because lately the numbers do not make sense." Luke's attention sharpened. She showed him 2 labels, with nearly identical order codes. "This one says, 'Basic cotton in the system,'" she whispered. "But the roll is imported linen. That has happened more than once." "You reported it?" Rachel hesitated. "I mentioned it to a supervisor. He told me to stop worrying about things above my pay grade." Before Luke could ask more, the click of heels echoed across the concrete floor. Serena Dalton, operations manager, entered with 2 supervisors behind her. Elegant, composed, and ambitious, Serena carried herself as though the warehouse belonged to her. Her expression hardened when she saw Rachel speaking with Luke. "Rachel, are the Henderson orders finished?" Almost, ma'am. Almost is not finished. Rachel lowered her eyes. Then Serena looked at Luke. Her entire voice changed. You are the new employee, correct? Yes, she smiled. If you have trouble adjusting, come directly to me. After she walked away, Luke glanced at Rachel. Is she always that friendly? Rachel gave the faintest smile. Depends who she is talking to. That evening, after most workers left, Luke found Rachel still folding fabric. Without asking, he started helping. She told him about the long ride home, the small house where she lived with her parents, and the way her paycheck covered groceries, medicine, and overdue repairs. She never complained. Luke listened. For the first time since his wife's death, silence beside another person did not feel empty. High above them, behind the glass wall of the administrative corridor, Serena stood motionless. She had noticed the way Luke looked at Rachel, and she did not like it. Luke arrived before sunrise the next morning, telling himself it was because suspicious shipments often moved early. Yet the first person he searched for was Rachel. She was already there. Her hair was tied back, and she was counting packages of imported trim beneath the harsh warehouse lights. Do you ever sleep? Luke asked. Rachel smiled faintly. On the bus. Before he could answer, Serena appeared holding coffee. You are early again, she said to Luke. I like working before the noise starts. Serena moved closer. Someone like you should not stay in the warehouse long. What does someone like me look like? Too observant. Luke almost smiled. Across the room, Rachel returned to her work. Serena followed his glance, and the warmth left her face. Minutes later, a supervisor rushed into the aisle. We are missing 2 rolls from the imported collection. Workers stopped. Those rolls were among the most expensive products in the building. Serena immediately took control. Who closed this section last night? Nobody answered at first. Then someone said, Rachel was here late. Heads turned. Rachel froze with her clipboard against her chest. I was organizing yesterday's returns, she said. Serena crossed her arms. And you were alone? Luke was here for part of it. Serena's eyes flickered toward him. Luke responded calmly. I did not see her remove anything. That does not mean nothing happened afterward. The accusation remained technically indirect, but everyone understood it. Throughout the day, whispers followed Rachel. Luke saw co-workers stop talking when she entered a corridor. He saw her hands tremble while recording measurements. At one point, she wrote the same number twice and stared at the page as if frightened by her own mistake. Near closing time, he found her behind stacked boxes of sewing supplies. You all right? I am fine. You are terrible at lying. Rachel tried to smile but could not. Finally, she whispered, I cannot lose this job. Luke waited. My dad cannot work like he used to. My mother does sewing for neighbors, but it does not bring in much. Most months my paycheck is what keeps everything going. Luke felt something tighten inside him. For years he had thought of payroll as numbers appearing on financial reports. Standing beside Rachel, he suddenly understood that one employee's paycheck could mean food, medicine, electricity, and dignity for an entire household. I did not take those roles, she said. I know. You cannot know. I know enough. Rachel looked at him with a gratitude that made him uncomfortable for reasons he could not explain. From the upper corridor, Serena watched them again. Her jealousy had begun as irritation. Now it became intention. That evening, Rachel stood near the employee gate waiting for her bus, beneath a cold drizzle. Luke saw her checking the schedule. How long until you get home? If everything connects, a little over 2 hours. I can drive you. Rachel immediately shook her head. No, really, thank you. It is raining. I am used to it. That does not make it reasonable. She eventually accepted. Luke deliberately used an old company sedan rather than his personal vehicle. As they traveled away from Greensboro, Streets gave way to darker roads bordered by trees and small properties. Rachel guided him toward a modest wooden house outside a rural community. Its paint had faded. One porch step had been repaired with mismatched lumber. Yet flower pots lined the railing. The yard was swept clean, and warm light shone behind handmade curtains. Rachel looked embarrassed. "It is not much." Luke turned toward her. "You said that like you should apologize." Before she could respond, the front door opened. Rachel's mother, Ruth, welcomed him inside when she learned he had driven her daughter home. Her father, Raymond, rose carefully from a worn armchair and insisted on shaking Luke's hand. They offered him supper. Luke tried to refuse. Ruth ignored him and placed another plate at the table. The meal was simple: chicken stew, cornbread, beans, and iced tea. Luke had eaten dinners prepared by celebrated chefs. None had felt this peaceful. Raymond spoke proudly about Rachel without realizing how uncomfortable the praise made her. "She has held this family together more times than she knows. Dad, it is true." Luke glanced at Rachel. She was staring at her plate. Something inside him, closed for years, shifted. Later, driving back alone, Luke understood that he had spent an evening without thinking about the accident that killed his wife. That realization filled him with guilt. Then, unexpectedly, hope. At the factory the next morning, Rachel was summoned before she even reached her workstation. Serena waited in the management office. Several reports lay across the desk. "Additional irregularities were found," Serena announced. Rachel stared at the paperwork. "I have never seen these. The entries came from your section." "I did not make them." Serena had already learned about the ride home. Jealousy made the final decision for her. "You are terminated for misconduct." Rachel's face went pale. She tried to explain. No one listened. Minutes later, she walked through the warehouse, carrying her belongings in a small bag, while tears slipped down her cheeks. When Luke saw her leaving, grief transformed into something he had not felt in years. Fury. Luke nearly ended the investigation that afternoon. He followed Rachel toward the employee exit, ready to reveal everything, reverse the dismissal, and destroy Serena's authority in front of the warehouse. Andrew stopped him by telephone. "If you expose yourself now," the auditor warned, "we lose whoever is behind the larger scheme." "She was fired because someone framed her." "I know. She is paying for our investigation. And if we move too early, whoever stole millions may walk away." Luke hated the logic, because it was correct. That evening he entered an unused records room after most employees had gone. Andrew brought copies of inventory histories, while Mason supplied shipping logs. They compared dates. Every disappearance had a pattern. Premium material was relabeled shortly before being transferred toward dispatch. Meanwhile, accounting paid inflated invoices connected to unusual vendors. Yet the link was still incomplete. The door opened. Serena stepped inside. "You work late," she said. Luke covered the papers casually. "So do you." Serena leaned against the table. "I heard Rachel blamed me for what happened." "She did not. You defend her often." "I defend people when there is no evidence against them." Serena's expression tightened. "She fooled you." Luke looked directly at her. "Did she?" "Women like Rachel know how to look innocent." "Women like Rachel?" Serena realized too late what she had revealed about herself. Luke gathered his papers. No employee should lose a livelihood because someone in management feels threatened. The words struck her harder than he intended. The following morning, Luke met privately with his father. Arthur listened without interruption, while Luke described Rachel's dismissal. When Andrew joined them, he placed several pages on the desk. "The misconduct report is defective," he said. "No camera review, no verified scan records, no witness, no proof she removed anything." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Who authorized termination?" "Serena." Arthur immediately called Human Resources. Reverse it. A director hesitated. Sir, Serena listed it as serious theft. I said reverse it, and contact the employee personally. She returns with full pay for every hour missed. Serena protested when informed. Arthur ended the conversation with one sentence. If you cannot distinguish suspicion from proof, you should reconsider whether you belong in management. Rachel returned 2 days later. She walked through the warehouse expecting hostility. Instead, she found Luke waiting near her station. You came back. My mother said I should. Smart woman. Rachel studied him. Why would the president personally order them to bring me back? Luke had prepared several explanations. None sounded convincing. Maybe somebody finally read the paperwork. Rachel nodded, though uncertainty remained. The investigation accelerated. Andrew discovered that several inflated invoices belonged to companies sharing contact information with a consulting firm operated by Samuel Dalton, Serena's older brother. Samuel had worked with Ainsley Textiles years earlier as a purchasing contractor. His access had supposedly ended. Apparently, it had not. Mason uncovered another connection. A senior driver named Curtis Boone repeatedly changed delivery routes shortly after leaving the factory. GPS records showed unexplained stops at a private storage facility. Luke and Mason visited that facility after dark. From across the road, they watched Curtis unload fabric carrying Ainsley inventory markings. Now they had the merchandise route. Andrew found the financial route. Samuel created false orders, inflated quantities, and arranged payment to shell companies. Curtis removed real products from legitimate shipments. Warehouse records were altered afterward to hide shortages. But Serena's role remained uncertain. Luke began reviewing internal emails. One message changed everything. It had been sent months earlier by Samuel to Serena. You need to keep the stock team from asking questions. Handle anyone who becomes curious. Rachel had become curious. Luke sat motionless after reading it. Serena might not have designed the scheme, but she had protected it. Worse, Rachel's dismissal had served two purposes. Jealousy had pushed Serena toward cruelty, but removing Rachel also eliminated someone who noticed the inventory manipulation. Luke felt ashamed. He had entered the warehouse hunting thieves. Instead, he had discovered how easily power could injure an innocent person without leaving visible scars. That evening, Rachel stayed late again. Luke helped her stack returned fabric. You do not have to keep helping me, she said. I know. You are strange. I have been told worse. She smiled. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rachel said quietly, I missed talking to you. Luke looked at her. The words were simple. They affected him more deeply than any declaration could have. I missed you too. Their eyes met. Luke wanted to tell her everything. His name. His family. The investigation. The reason he sometimes disappeared into restricted hallways. But men who had spent years hiding from grief often became skilled at hiding other truths too. So he said nothing. Rachel trusted the man she thought he was. That fact brought Luke happiness and shame at the same time. 3 nights later, Andrew delivered the final packet. Bank transfers. False purchase orders. Access logs. Messages. Warehouse scans. Photographs from the storage facility. The evidence connected Samuel and Curtis to years of theft and linked Serena to concealment and retaliation. Luke carried the folder into the president's office. Arthur looked through every page. When he finished, he closed the folder slowly. Tomorrow? Luke nodded. Tomorrow. Through the windows, the factory lights glowed across the property. For weeks, Luke had walked those floors as an ordinary employee. He had learned who complained, who cheated, who stayed late, who protected others, and who worked with dignity when nobody important was watching. Tomorrow, everyone would discover who he was. Only one person's reaction frightened him: Rachel's. Before dawn, senior managers received instructions ordering every department to gather in the main production hall before the shift began. Rumors spread immediately. Some workers expected layoffs. Others whispered about police. Rachel stood near the cutting tables as employees from accounting, shipping, administration, maintenance, and warehouse operations entered the hall. Security guards positioned themselves near the exits. Serena arrived wearing a dark suit and an expression of practiced confidence, but Luke could see fear beneath it. Samuel had been brought in under the pretense of discussing a supplier audit. Curtis stood with the drivers. Then Arthur Ainsley walked onto a temporary platform. The room became quiet. For many years, Arthur began, this company has supported families because thousands of people chose to work honestly. He paused. Unfortunately, some people decided that trust was something they could steal. Workers glanced at one another. Arthur explained that an internal investigation had uncovered false purchasing, manipulated stock records, unauthorized supplier payments, and systematic theft from deliveries. Rachel listened with widening eyes. Then Arthur said, the investigation succeeded because several people entered departments without revealing their actual purpose. Andrew stepped from the accounting group. Mason emerged from administration. Murmurs spread. Arthur looked toward the main entrance. And the person who coordinated the investigation worked among you in the warehouse. Footsteps sounded across the concrete floor. Luke entered, but he was no longer wearing work boots and a warehouse shirt. He wore a tailored light gray suit. His hair was neatly styled. Two company attorneys walked behind him. For several seconds, nobody understood. Then recognition spread like electricity. That is Luke Ainsley. The owner's son? You are kidding. Rachel did not speak. Her face lost its color. Serena looked as if the floor had vanished beneath her. Luke walked toward his father and accepted the microphone. He had addressed investors before. He had spoken at conferences. Nothing had ever been as difficult as speaking while Rachel stared at him with hurt in her eyes. For several weeks, he said, I worked beside many of you without introducing myself honestly. Silence deepened. I carried boxes, checked inventory, ate in the employee cafeteria, waited beside loading docks, and I learned more about this company during those weeks than I learned from years of reports. He looked around the room. I saw people who worked hard when supervisors were absent. I saw others abuse authority. I saw employees blamed because they were easier to sacrifice than people with titles. His eyes moved briefly toward Rachel. One innocent employee was dismissed after being accused without evidence. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Luke continued. He described how Samuel had created false purchasing arrangements and hidden payments through outside companies. Andrew displayed copies of financial records. Luke then explained Curtis's role in removing expensive fabric during deliveries and transporting it to a private facility. Security officers moved behind the driver. Curtis began protesting. You cannot prove that. Mason placed printed photographs on a table. We already did. Samuel attempted to leave. Two investigators waiting near the doors stopped him. Serena finally stepped forward. I did not steal anything. Luke turned toward her. No, but you protected the people who did. Her expression hardened. My brother told me there were accounting issues. I did not know the full situation. You knew enough to bury questions. I was protecting the company. You were protecting Samuel. Serena glanced around desperately. Luke produced the message instructing her to silence curious warehouse employees. And when Rachel noticed irregularities, he said, you chose her. That was different. Was it? Serena said nothing. Luke's voice became colder. You were jealous because you saw me speaking with her. That made your decision personal. But removing her also helped conceal the fraud. Serena's confidence collapsed. Officials escorted Samuel and Curtis away for further questioning and arrest procedures. Serena was removed from her position immediately and required to cooperate with investigators. For years she had walked through the warehouse believing power meant that other people had to lower their eyes. Now she could barely lift her own. When the meeting ended, employees crowded into small groups. Some apologized to Rachel. Others could not face her. The women who once whispered that Luke would never truly notice someone like her suddenly had nothing to say. Yet Rachel cared about none of that. She walked quickly toward the parking lot. Luke followed. "Rachel," she kept walking. "Please." She stopped and turned. "You lied to me." Her voice was quiet, which hurt more than shouting. "I had to protect the investigation." "You knew everything about me." "I know." "You met my parents." "I know." "My father told you things he tells almost nobody." Luke lowered his eyes. Rachel fought back tears. "I thought you were someone like me. I was never pretending about that part." She laughed bitterly. "You own this place. My family owns it. That is supposed to make this better?" "No." Luke moved closer but did not touch her. "The name was hidden. The investigation was hidden. But every conversation with you was real." Rachel looked away. "Was driving me home real?" "Yes." "Eating with my parents?" "Yes." "The nights helping me work?" "Yes." "And how you felt?" Luke swallowed. That was the most real part of all. Rachel finally looked at him. Luke had thought revealing thieves would be difficult. Instead, standing before one wounded woman felt more frightening than confronting an entire criminal scheme. "I did not fall for you because you knew my family name," he said. "You did not know it." Rachel's tears slipped free. "I fell for the woman who took 2 buses and still arrived before everyone else. The daughter who carried her family without announcing the weight. The employee who noticed things managers ignored. The person who stayed kind, even when people treated kindness like weakness." Rachel remained silent. Luke continued softly. "I spent years surrounded by people who knew exactly what I owned. You were the first person in a long time who cared only about who I seemed to be." "That man did not exist." "He did." Luke touched his chest. "He just had another last name." Rachel wiped her face. "I need time." The answer hurt, but Luke nodded. "For once, I will not hide anything from you. Take all the time you need." Then, he let her walk away. The scandal transformed Ainsley Textiles. Auditors spent weeks examining old transactions. Several employees who knowingly assisted the scheme were dismissed. New inventory controls were introduced, and no manager could terminate a worker for serious misconduct without an independent review. Arthur personally ordered one additional change. A confidential employee reporting system was created so warehouse workers could question suspicious activity without going through supervisors. Rachel should never have needed courage just to tell someone the labels were wrong, Arthur told Luke. Luke agreed. Rachel continued working, but for a while she kept her distance from him. He respected it. He stopped appearing beside her workstation without reason. He did not send expensive gifts or use his position to force conversations. Instead, he wrote one short note. "I am sorry that I asked for your trust while withholding mine. No excuse. No request." He left it with Ruth when visiting Rachel's parents several weeks later. Raymond invited him onto the porch. "You hurt her," the older man said. "I know. You also defended her." "Yes. That does not erase the first thing." "No, sir." Raymond studied him. "Good answer." They sat quietly. Luke eventually told him about his late wife and the accident. He explained how afterward he had avoided closeness because caring about someone began to feel like agreeing to lose them. Raymond listened. "You cannot punish the living because death frightened you." Luke carried that sentence home. At work, Rachel's reliability became impossible to overlook. During the investigation, she helped auditors reconstruct warehouse procedures because she remembered where old stock had been placed and which codes had changed. A temporary warehouse supervisor named Dennis Cole was appointed after Serena's removal. Dennis was competent but approaching retirement. One afternoon, he entered Arthur's office. "The best person to replace me is Rachel." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Does she want management?" "She thinks she does not deserve it." "That was not my question." Dennis smiled. "She wants the work. She is afraid of the title." Rachel initially rejected the promotion. "I do not have a management degree." Dennis shrugged. "Serena had credentials covering half a wall. How did that work out?" Rachel almost laughed. "You know the inventory, people trust you, you do not panic, and you notice mistakes before they become disasters. I am just a warehouse worker." Dennis shook his head. "No, that is your job. It is not the limit of your ability." Rachel accepted on a trial basis. Her first decision surprised everyone. She called the warehouse team together. "I know some of you believed the accusations against me," she said. "Some of you repeated things you should not have repeated." Several workers looked down. "I am not interested in revenge, but from today forward, nobody in this department will be humiliated because of rumors." Earl grinned from the back. "That sounds like a manager." Rachel finally smiled. Her leadership was quiet. She corrected privately and praised publicly. She learned every new employee's name. When workers suggested safer shelf arrangements, she listened. Luke watched from a distance. Her promotion made him proud, but he refused to take credit for it. Dennis had recommended her. Arthur had approved it. Rachel had earned it. Months passed before she voluntarily entered Luke's office. He looked up in surprise. "I thought powerful executives were supposed to have better coffee," she said, after tasting the cup on his desk. Luke nearly laughed. "That bad?" "Terrible." It was their first easy conversation since the truth came out. They began again slowly. No disguises. No hidden meetings. Luke visited Rachel's parents openly. Rachel met Arthur outside the factory, discovering that the intimidating founder was unexpectedly sentimental and deeply worried about his son. One Sunday, Arthur showed Rachel an old photograph of Luke before his wife died. "He used to smile like that all the time," Arthur said. Rachel looked across the yard, where Luke was helping Raymond repair a loose gate. "He smiles more now." Arthur nodded. "Because of you." Rachel shook her head. "Not because of me alone." Arthur looked curious. He finally decided he was allowed to live again. That evening, Luke walked Rachel toward the porch. "I owe you something," he said. "What?" "A first date where you know who I am before getting into the car." Rachel smiled. "That seems reasonable." He took her to a small family restaurant rather than somewhere luxurious. They talked until the staff began cleaning nearby tables. Before leaving, Rachel reached across and took his hand. Luke looked down, surprised. "I still get angry when I remember you lying," she said. "I understand. But I also remember the man stacking fabric beside me after everyone went home. That man is still available for warehouse duty." "Good." She squeezed his hand. "Because I think I am ready to forgive him." Luke did not answer immediately. He simply held her hand as though it were something fragile and priceless. Rachel's promotion became permanent before the end of the year. Her office was the same room Serena had once occupied. On her first official morning, Rachel stood in the doorway remembering the day she had entered that room accused of theft. The furniture had changed. So had the person behind the desk. Earl brought her a battered clipboard. "Thought the boss might need this." Rachel laughed. It was her old warehouse clipboard. She placed it beside the computer. "Now I am prepared." Not everyone adjusted easily. A few employees who once mocked Rachel suddenly became overly polite. Others expected retaliation. It never came. When one woman who had laughed at her during the accusations made a serious shipping mistake, she approached Rachel trembling. "I understand, if you want to write me up." Rachel reviewed the paperwork. "Was it intentional?" "No." "Did you hide it?" "No." "Then we fix it and learn from it." The woman stared at her. "After the way I treated you." Rachel folded her hands. "If I become cruel because someone was cruel to me, then the cruelty wins twice." Word spread quickly. Respect followed. Luke fell in love with her again in a different way. At first he had admired her gentleness. Now he admired her strength. Rachel, meanwhile, discovered that wealth had not protected Luke from loneliness. His house was large, but strangely empty. Many rooms had gone unused since his wife's death. One evening, Rachel found him standing near a box of photographs. "You do not have to hide her from me," she said. Luke looked startled. "I was not. You close this box every time someone comes near." He sat beside her. "I loved her. I know. For a long time I thought loving anyone again meant betraying her." Rachel rested her hand beside his. "And now? Now I think she would be angry that I wasted so much time being afraid." Rachel smiled. "Sounds like she was smart." She was. Luke looked at Rachel carefully. "So are you." Their relationship became known throughout the company, but neither allowed it to alter Rachel's professional standing. Whenever possible, decisions involving her department went through Arthur or another executive. Rachel insisted on it. "I spent too long proving I earned my work," she told Luke. "I will not have people saying I received everything because you love me." Luke nodded. "That is fair. Good. Though, for the record, loving you has not made you easier to negotiate with. That is also fair." Several months later, Luke brought Rachel to the rural house where they had first shared dinner. Raymond and Ruth were waiting on the porch. Rachel immediately became suspicious. "Why is everyone acting strange?" "No reason," her mother said far too quickly. Luke led Rachel toward the old flower pots lining the railing. He did not organize photographers. There was no expensive venue. Only the porch, her parents, and the place where Luke had first understood what kind of woman she was. He took a small ring from his pocket. Rachel covered her mouth. "I had a speech," Luke said, "but your father told me long speeches are dangerous." Raymond called from his chair. "I said boring." Rachel laughed through sudden tears. Luke looked up at her. "The first time I came here, I was pretending to be poorer than I was." Her smile softened. "But everything I felt inside this house was true. You taught me that a person can have almost nothing and still create a home richer than places filled with expensive things." He took her hand. "I cannot promise you a life without grief, mistakes, or difficult days. I learned that nobody can. But I can promise that you will never again have to wonder who is standing beside you." Rachel cried openly now. "Will you marry me?" She nodded. "Yes." Ruth began crying before Luke could even stand. Raymond wiped his eyes and pretended dust had entered them. Their wedding was held the following spring in a small garden outside Greensboro. Arthur cried when he saw his son waiting beneath the trees. Luke noticed. "You all right?" Arthur cleared his throat. "Pollen. Dad. Very aggressive pollen." Rachel walked toward them with Raymond beside her. The ceremony was simple. Warehouse employees stood beside executives. Ruth sat near Arthur. Dennis, now retired, attended with his wife. Earl somehow managed to tell everyone that he had known the romance would happen from the first week. For Luke, the most important moment came after the vows. Rachel leaned toward him. "No more disguises." Luke smiled. "No more disguises." Their marriage did not turn Rachel into someone else. She still woke early. She still kept the battered clipboard in her office. She still occasionally packed lunch from home instead of ordering food. When Luke offered her a driver, she told him the idea was ridiculous. When he bought her parents an enormous house without asking, Rachel made him cancel the arrangement. "They do not want a mansion," she explained. They want a safe home near us. So together they found a modest house on a quiet street. Raymond built a small workshop behind it. Ruth planted flowers along the porch. For the first time in years, they no longer worried about whether one broken appliance or unexpected bill would ruin an entire month. Luke gave them comfort. Rachel made certain he also preserved their independence. And slowly, the lives of two families that once seemed to belong to completely different worlds began to feel like one. Ainsley Textiles emerged stronger from the scandal. Luke and Arthur introduced transparent purchasing controls, rotating audits, anonymous reporting, and employee councils that included warehouse and production workers. Luke had learned that executives often saw what reports allowed them to see. The people on the floor saw everything else. One afternoon, several years after the investigation, Luke walked through the warehouse and found Rachel kneeling beside a nervous new employee. The young man had entered the wrong inventory code and expected punishment. Rachel showed him how to correct it. "Everybody makes mistakes," she said. "Hiding them is what turns mistakes into problems." Luke leaned against a shelf. Rachel noticed him. "Can I help you?" "I am observing management." "That sounds suspicious." "I have experience with undercover work." Rachel gave him a warning look. "Do not even joke about that." Luke laughed. Some memories had finally become gentle enough to touch. Later that day, Rachel found the old clipboard in her office and carried it outside. Its edges were worn smooth. "That thing survived everything," Luke said. "So did I." They walked together through the loading yard. Beyond the fence, trees moved in the evening wind. Rachel told him that one of the women who had once mocked her was applying for a supervisor training program. "You recommended her?" "Yes. After what she did, she apologized years ago." Luke considered that. "You forgive more easily than I do." "No." Rachel shook her head. "I remember everything." "Then how do you do it?" "Because remembering what someone did is different from deciding they can never become better." Luke looked at her. It was one of countless small moments in which Rachel reminded him why authority had never changed her. That winter, Arthur formally retired from daily operations. At the farewell dinner, he raised a glass toward his son and daughter-in-law. "I spent most of my life thinking the company was my greatest achievement," he said. The room quieted. "I was wrong." Luke smiled. Arthur continued. "A company is brick, machinery, contracts, and numbers. Important things, yes, but they disappear eventually. What matters is whether people were treated better because you had the power to help them." Rachel lowered her eyes. Arthur looked at her. "I learned that partly from someone who once worked in our warehouse with an old clipboard." Guests applauded. Rachel wiped away a tear. Years passed. Raymond grew slower, but remained stubbornly determined to repair everything himself. Ruth still cooked too much food whenever Luke visited. The company expanded into another facility, but Rachel insisted that managers regularly spend time on the production floor. "You cannot lead people you only know through spreadsheets," she said. Luke knew exactly where that wisdom came from. One evening, during an anniversary celebration, they drove past the bus stop where Rachel had once waited in the rain. Luke slowed the car. "You used to stand there every night, sometimes for 40 minutes, and then another bus. Yes, you never complained. I complained inside my head." Luke laughed. "That ruins the legend." "Good. Legends are exhausting." Rachel looked through the window. "I used to watch cars go by and wonder what it would feel like not to calculate every dollar before buying something." Luke became quiet. "Do you miss that life? The hardship?" "No." She thought for a moment. "But I am grateful I remember it." "Why?" "Because comfort can make people forget how expensive ordinary problems are when you have little money." She turned toward him. "A broken washing machine is annoying to us. To someone else, it might mean choosing between repairs and groceries." Luke nodded. The company had taught him business. Rachel had taught him proportion. He had once believed wealth gave a person a wider view of the world. Often, he realized it did the opposite. Money could build walls so comfortable that those inside stopped seeing beyond them. That understanding changed the way Luke led. It changed wages, emergency assistance policies, training programs, and promotions. But most importantly, it changed how he judged people. He no longer confused impressive presentation with character. He had seen Serena dressed perfectly while destroying an innocent woman. He had seen Rachel in a worn uniform protect company property more faithfully than executives paid many times her salary. Titles revealed responsibility. They did not reveal worth. And Luke never forgot the difference. Long after the scandal had faded into company history, Luke sometimes returned alone to the original warehouse early in the morning. The building had been renovated, yet enough remained unchanged to summon memories. He could still imagine Rachel at the cutting table, pushing blonde hair behind her ear while measuring fabric. That image had become the dividing line in his life. Before Rachel, he had survived. After Rachel, he had gradually begun living again. On one such morning, she found him there. "You disappeared," she said. "I was thinking." "That is dangerous." He smiled. Rachel stood beside him. "What about?" "The first week." She groaned. "You were terrible at pretending to be a warehouse employee." "I was excellent. You carried a box like it had personally insulted you." "I had never carried that many boxes." "Exactly." They laughed. Then Luke became quiet. "I thought I entered this warehouse to save the company." Rachel looked around. "You did." "Not really." He took her hand. "The investigation saved money. You saved something else." Rachel squeezed his fingers. By then, both of them understood that life rarely separated pain neatly from blessing. Luke would never call his wife's death necessary. Rachel would never call humiliation useful. The theft, betrayal, accusation, and lies had caused real wounds. Good things arriving afterward did not erase what came before. But suffering did not have to become the final author of a person's life. Luke had once allowed grief to define him. He thought shutting doors protected him from future pain. Instead, it protected him from joy as well. Rachel had suffered differently. Poverty, exhausting journeys, ridicule, and a false accusation could have taught her bitterness. She chose something harder. She remained capable of kindness without becoming naive, and capable of forgiveness without pretending wrong had never happened. As they grew older, that became the lesson they valued most. People often spend years chasing the visible proofs of a successful life: a larger house, a better title, a respected name, enough savings to stop fearing tomorrow. There is nothing shameful about wanting security. Rachel knew better than most that poverty was not romantic. She remembered the anxiety of bills, the exhaustion of public transportation, and the fear that losing one paycheck could hurt everyone she loved. Yet she also knew that possessions could solve only certain kinds of problems. Money could replace a broken roof. It could not build trust after betrayal. A promotion could change how others addressed you. It could not guarantee that you would respect them in return. Power could make people obey. It could never make them love you. Luke had inherited wealth before he understood any of those things. Rachel had learned them before she possessed much at all. Together, they discovered that character is revealed most clearly when nobody seems important enough to impress. The employee who cleans carefully when no supervisor is watching. The manager who listens to someone with no authority. The person who refuses to humiliate another even after gaining the power to do so. Those quiet choices become a life. Rachel never forgot the bus rides. Luke never forgot the uniform. And whenever younger employees asked how two people from such different worlds had built a life together, Rachel usually smiled and said that they had not met in different worlds at all. They had met in the same warehouse, doing the same work, surrounded by the same noise. For a little while, status had disappeared. And without status between them, they were able to see what many people spend a lifetime overlooking. Not what someone owned, not what title appeared beside a name, but what remained when every label was removed. In the end, that was the greatest fortune either of them ever found.